American National is proud to support No Ceiling, helping to tell the stories of professional women. American National is dedicated to providing paths for leadership and advancement through the Women's Forum, a group of female leaders who provide encouragement, mentorship, and advocacy for American National female employees. With 4 corporate locations in Galveston and League City, Texas, Albany, New York, and Springfield, Missouri, the opportunities for leadership advancement are vast. American National believes taking care of business starts with taking care of its employees.
Going around the country, I also got the opportunity to see how education worked in different places and what worked and what didn't work. And it's just been something that I've just been drawn to from the very beginning.
Today's guest is Shurita Thomas-Tate. She's a speech pathologist who teaches about language and literacy development and disorders at Missouri State University. It's her deep passion for equity and understanding that drives her work, and it's also what led her to run for the Springfield Public Schools Board of Education. Compared to the rest of Springfield, the school district is very diverse. She says those kids needed a voice, and that decision makers should be as diverse as the population they serve. We'll also talk about her nonprofit to boost literacy among underserved kids. From SBJ Podcasts, I'm Christine Temple, and this is No Ceiling, a show that goes in depth with local women, sharing their journey to the top of their professions and the challenges and triumphs they faced along the way. They're rewriting the script on success, and there's no ceiling. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Shurita.
Thank you.
So I want to start with your position at Missouri State University.
Yes.
Because you have such a fascinating role there. One of the courses that you teach is cultural and linguistic diversity.
It's a fun class. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Tell me about what is linguistic diversity?
So when I talk about linguistic diversity, what I'm referring to is how language varies across people. Particularly, I'm talking about regional and social dialects of American English. Now, I'm saying American English because every language has its variations. And so when I talk about linguistic diversity, so in my classes, my students know I do this 5 parts of language thing all the time. I hold up my hand and do the 5 parts of language. And that is the sound system, the word part system, the sentence system, the vocabulary, and the usage system. And that creates the components of language. Mm-hmm. Well, all languages vary on each of those components, regionally, by age, by gender, by social groups, etc. And those variations are what we study. In particular, I'm interested in them because of how they impact our interactions and how they impact education. And so we study them. I introduce these variables to students so that they can be aware of how language varies and so they don't negatively impact students or people that they work with clinically.
Mm-hmm. What are some examples of diversity within language as it relates to culture?
So some of the language variations we talk about are like Southern English. So one of the big things we talk about is this idea of standard English. And whether or not it's a thing. And so we prefer in my class to use the term standardized English rather than standard English. When we say standard English, we often think of it as being one thing. There is a standard. And the reality is that there's not, because language varies. It's what language does. Language changes and language varies by all sorts of variables. And so there is not one standard. There's lots of standards. So we talk more about standardized for a setting, for a context, for a group, for a place, etc. And so we start kind of there with what it means. And so everyone has a dialect. Everyone speaks a dialect because dialect means variation, a subset of a language, and every language has a subset. And so little things like vocabulary. One of the fun things we start with in my class is, what do you call the fizzy drink in a can?
Oh.
What do you call it?
Soda.
Okay, so depending on where you're from, it could be soda, it could be pop, it could be cold drink, it could be Coke. I remember when I moved to Louisiana and someone said, what kind of Coke do you want? I'm like, I think there's just one kind. Diet Coke or regular Coke. They're like, no, we got orange, we got red, we have Sprite. I'm like, oh, they mean pop. I'm from Oregon and I say pop. So that's a vocabulary difference that is a part of how language varies. There's also pronunciation differences. There's a how do you say the waxy instrument that you color with in preschool?
Oh, a crayon?
So different people say it different kinds of ways. Some people call them crowns. Mm-hmm.
Which is the wrong way, right? No.
It's a different way.
Different,
And so that's what we focus on a lot, is the difference between different and disordered, because we're speech language pathologists. And we don't want to negatively label someone as disordered when it's just different.
Right, yeah. So other than just the fascination of language, I mean, how does that come into play in the workplace, in education? Because when we speak differently, it impacts the way we perceive others.
So my lesson for this week in class is on linguistic profiling and the dangers of that and what it looks like. And so the class isn't just a linguistics course where we're talking about these language parts. They have other classes where they learn about these language parts and some of the parts of the linguistic variations. But we talk also about the internalized work of us. So I start my class every semester with understanding cultural self-awareness. And so oftentimes as a African-American person teaching a class which is usually about 99% white, many of my students have not had a Black professor, and so we start the class with me helping them to understand their own cultural identities. Oftentimes whiteness is not thought of as a cultural identity for students. And so when I say that this course is about cultural linguistic diversity, often my students think that we're going to talk about them, the other. Not about me and myself, but we're going to talk about those people who sound different, who look different, who have different experiences than me. And I have to help the students become aware of this class is about you. It's about me. It's about us. And we're all cultural beings, and we all have a cultural linguistic identity, and you need to become aware of yours before you start to study others. Yeah. And so we start the course with cultural self-awareness, understanding themselves as cultural beings before we can study differences in cultural linguistic diversity.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get into speech pathology?
So interestingly, in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up, I went to a school. It's Benson Polytechnic School, and it was a magnet school. You applied to go to this high school. It wasn't one of the neighborhood schools, and it was a vocational tech school at one point, and you chose a major. They had engineering majors, they had architecture majors, and they had health occupations. And I was a health occupations major. And for your junior and senior year, you did externships. So we went to school half a day, and we worked out in the community half a day at different kinds of placements. And I had the luxury of having more than one placement in speech pathology. One was at a VA hospital, and one was at a children's hospital. And both of those experiences just exposed me to the diversity of speech language pathologists working from birth to death on the whole age spectrum, and with a number of different kinds of disorders and disabilities. Initially, I thought I wanted to go to med school, but I found speech pathology and just became fascinated with the wide scope of the field and the ability to work in so many different areas with that degree that it became my interest. Mm-hmm.
What was the, within children, because that's kind of where your passion lies?
It is.
What was it about kids and language and the challenges that can be associated when we don't understand each other?
Yeah.
What drew you to that specifically?
That is, so I think it's because of my interest in education, how education is a driving force for change for people in the world. You know, like we gain education, it provides us with the opportunity to move forward in different realms of life. It exposes us to so many different kinds of things. And when we think and talk about like poverty and disparities within our society, education is so important. And so having the ability to communicate and having the ability to learn through language and having the ability to use language for learning, it was very important to study those early developmental areas. And I think also just looking at I'm fascinated by the fact that children learn to talk and communicate without us teaching them. I mean, given a child who does not have any cognitive or neurological or other kinds of sensory deficits, given the right environment, they learn how to talk. They learn how to communicate in a very short amount of time. Have you ever tried to learn another language? I mean, it takes a lot of effort oftentimes for us to do that. But children in the first 2 to 3 years of life become pretty competent communicators with little effort from us other than just talking to them and communicating and providing them with the right atmosphere. And it's fascinating. So when that goes wrong, we need to help assist those students and those children and their families to gain those skills that they're not able to gather on their own from the environment.
You mentioned that within Missouri State University, you have a predominantly white student population.
Yes, in my program.
In your program, okay. But then when we think about diversity within the context of Springfield Public Schools is probably like the most diverse pocket. It's about 25% minority students. So what are the challenges within that student-teacher relationship when there's perhaps a mismatch, I guess, in linguistic dialect?
Not just linguistic dialect, just with culture, because my linguistic dialect is all a kind of a hodgepodge of experiences, because our language is a part of our experience, right? Our cultural experience. I talk about culture as being the lens through which we see the world, and our culture is developed through our experiences with people, places, things, etc., that shapes our cultural identity, and including your language. And so my experience, my language right now is, I'm from the West Coast. I've lived in the Midwest, and I've lived in the South, and I'm highly educated. So all of those things together makes my language variation kind of nondescript. It's kind of a standardized kind of experience. It can vary based on my context. If I'm talking to a different group of people, it may change, or if I'm doing something different other than a podcast, it may also change. But for my students in particular, I think the biggest issue is in their unawareness or inability to understand how to interact with me. It's not just the verbal part, it's the interpersonal part. And I think there are a lot of stereotypes or biases that they enter the classroom with that I challenge. They may have stereotypes or biases about Black people. They may have stereotypes or biases about women, and they may have stereotypes and biases that I'm not aware of. And those things are the things that I have to challenge, in our interactions. Do they trust me as an authority? Do they trust my knowledge base? Do they trust that I am wanting the best for them? All of those things are some of the challenges that I face in the classroom. And because of our students come from all over the place at Missouri State, they're not just from Springfield. We get a lot of students from rural areas. We got a lot of students who are from areas that aren't as diverse as Springfield. And so that is where the challenge comes from. And they may have never had the opportunity to interact with someone like me. And so it becomes a challenge, not an insurmountable one, but a new experience that requires some adjusting.
Mm-hmm. And then what about at the K-12 level?
Yeah.
Because you had told me previously about kind of some theories as it relates to teacher bias, potentially.
There are some theories that, particularly in my field, that we hold on to help us to understand the variables that contribute to these disparities. We're talking mostly about things like the achievement gap. There are three prevailing theories, and one of the theories is called the teacher bias theory. That theory says that students who are from underrepresented populations, particularly those who are from culturally linguistically diverse backgrounds, I call that the CLD background, culturally linguistic diverse background, those teachers have low expectations for them, and those students rise to that low expectation. And so we have low attainment from students from those backgrounds because the teachers don't expect much from them and give them very little. This can result in those students not getting opportunities in special programs. This may result in students not getting advanced placement opportunities, all of those things, or even just quality educational experiences in the classroom. That's one of the theories. The next theory is called the mismatch theory. The mismatch theory says that there's a mismatch between the students' linguistic and cultural experiences that they bring to the classroom, which the students may have difficulty reconciling in order to learn from that environment. And so in particular, this theory talks a lot about literacy. It talks about how books are in a standardized form that the students may not have experience with in their early years, and that as they are learning to read, that may be a barrier to learning how to read. There have been some experiments, some research that has demonstrated that using the dialect of the student as a bridge for early literacy is effective. However, it has not landed well among policymakers and educators because people think that you're teaching kids how to speak in dialect, and the reality is that kids are already speaking in their dialects, but we're using that dialect to help teach them how to read. It's very effective, but not something that is widespread because of the stigma attached to teaching through that medium. The last theory is called linguistic awareness or linguistic flexibility. And that theory deals with children who are good at language, regardless of what the variation of language that they use is. If those students are more successful academically because they're able to switch between different forms of language, the school form, the home form. They can figure out what form is necessary to be successful in different kinds of environments. And we, as people who have advanced degrees in educational experiences, we do that. We call that register switching. We switch from a formal to an informal based on our context. Yeah. And kids who are good at language are able to do that without explicit instruction. The good thing is that I've done in my research, I've been able to demonstrate that children who don't make that switch, who aren't linguistically flexible, we can teach them to be more linguistic flexible. Mm-hmm.
So knowing that about kids, it makes so much sense to me why you want to run for the school board.
Yeah.
So tell me about that decision, because now, of course, you're a member of Springfield Public Schools school board as of April.
As of April, yes.
But tell me, going back to the beginning, why did you want to join the school board? What did you hope that you could achieve?
I've always been engaged in community. Community is very important to me. When I first moved to Springfield, I must admit, it wasn't a thrill for me to be in Springfield. I was not necessarily excited about what Springfield offered because it wasn't as diverse as the places that I've lived previously. The university was smaller than the universities that I've been engaged with in the past. And I just wasn't sure of how and where I was going to fit in and whether or not this was going to be a place that I can make home. The change happened when I got involved in the community because once you are engaged in the community and you become a member of the community, everything matters. Until then, I would just be working a job, and that's not who I am. And so getting involved with the community and understanding the community needs helps you to see where the deficits are and where the holes are and how you can fit into those spaces. And for me, it was representation in the school district. There has been a lack of representation in decision making and policy making for the schools in Springfield, and I felt like I could make a contribution there because of my background and experiences and the things that I've bring to the table I think would be useful, particularly in the last few years as Springfield has really struggled in some areas with regards to not just Springfield, but our nation has had a lot of racial unrest, and we've seen even that in Springfield Public Schools over the last few years. I felt like there was an opportunity for me to provide some leadership and some insight to how to improve our school district. I want the best for our schools in Springfield. And when we have strong education in our community, it makes for a stronger community. These kids are going to be the ones who are going to be running things in our community in the next 10, 15 years. And so it's imperative for us to prepare them to go out into society and be strong contributors. And we have some things that need to be addressed in the district. And I felt like they had not been addressed, not because of a lack of compassion or passion for children in our district, but you often don't know what you don't know, particularly when it comes to perspective. Again, that whole idea of lens and what you see and what you experience is based on your experience. And without representation, you miss some perspective. And so representation matters, and I felt like I could provide that representation.
What were some of your action items? What did you hope to achieve? Because that's a really big goal, and you kind of have to break it down.
So I started attending the school board meetings a year or more before running for school board. I started going there regularly. I wanted to see how this district was running and how decisions were being made and what kind of data they were presenting. And in those meetings, and I would have the opportunity to see how data data drives decision making, but oftentimes I felt like they would gloss over some issues with regards to diversity without addressing them directly. They would kind of gloss over them, and I don't think it was done maliciously. I think it was done because oftentimes we just don't know what we don't know. Even in research, and this is no knock on anyone in particular, even in research, as a person who does published research in academic journals, I know that oftentimes we've had to fight to publish research that takes a different perspective because journal editors and reviewers aren't always aware of some of these differences. So we have to kind of inform the journals about our differences before they would be willing to publish some of our research. And so it's not a knock on anyone's intelligence or anyone's motives. It's more about let me help you to understand this. One of the things we know, like even with NIH and other funding organizations for research, they require that you include diversity because research in the past just eliminated the diversity issues because they didn't know how to interpret it. So oftentimes we just we overlook things that we don't know how to interpret or understand. And I was hoping to be able to bring some interpretation or understanding to those items.
What does your position mean for the diverse students within SPS? Because of course you're able to bring that perspective, and by virtue of you being there, it's a part of the conversation. But I'm thinking about just seeing you on that board. Yeah. So I think it's huge. I mean, I think, sometimes, it's hard to imagine yourself in a position or imagine yourself having opportunities when you can't even visualize it. And I think I provide that visualization for students as an opportunity for things that they can pursue in the future. Just seeing a person like myself, I recently did the graduations. I did the graduation for Central High School, and being up there on the podium during graduation, I think plays a big role, not just for the minority and African American students, but also for the white students and the non-minority students, that for them to see a person like me in a position of authority changes their experience, their lens of how they view the world. Like, oh yeah, she can do that too. Like, we've never seen that before. And so I think it allows, again, for a expanded view of the world. And beyond your demographics that make you who you are, you also brought perseverance to the role because you didn't make it the first time.
I did not make it the first time, but I have expressed that as not a loss, but a learning opportunity and a win. It was a win for me because one of my goals in running was, of course, to win, but also to bring some topics and some conversations to the forefront that I don't think that we were having before. Again, it's that thing where I'm attending these meetings and I'm hearing you present this data, but you're not talking about it in the way that I felt that it needed to be addressed. So I'm going to force the conversation. These are the conversations that I want us to have. And so through campaigning, I brought those conversations to the forefront. That's a win. It forced us to think about and talk about things that may be uncomfortable, that we may not have addressed in the past. And so that was a win for me. So I felt like that was important. And it also got my name out there and made people aware that there was someone who wanted to shake things up a little bit. And so it was a long, hard run. That was my first time running for any kind of public service position. And wow, what a run it was. It was time consuming, it was expensive, and it was just exhausting. But it was worth it. I didn't win, and I was running against two incumbents. They have that name recognition, and they've been in Springfield working for longer than I have, and they had lots of support. But I came in, with strong numbers, and I was proud of the work that I did. The following year, I committed to run again, and I did. I ran again, and here I am.
Did you get some of that motivation from the community? Did you
got a lot of motivation from the community, but there was also that internal drive that I have also. But the community was very supportive. I got lots of support, even from people who didn't support me at the polls, recognized the need for change. And I felt like, the timing was just right. There's a lot of folks who recognize that we need something different in Springfield. And I was bringing that, and I felt like people were ready for it. I think the timing was right.
So now you have the seat and you have the authority, and but of course it's 2020.
Oh, it's 2020. What a time to enter the board.
Right. How are you still bringing those issues to the forefront amid a pandemic where everything's an emergency.
Everything's an emergency, but even within emergency, you have students who are disproportionately impacted by this emergency. So, just making sure that we don't overlook those students who, while all of us are facing a pandemic, some people are facing it in multiple ways. It's that idea that it hits them in different kinds of ways, and so we want to make sure that we are thinking about those students. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job of addressing those issues, and I'm very proud of the work that the board and the district is doing right now. I know that I have friends who are involved in education around the U.S., and I've heard from them that their districts, even in larger cities, are not faring as well. They were not prepared for a pandemic. They did not have the technology in place. They did not have launch like we do. And so I'm very proud of the work that Springfield has done in preparing for this pandemic. I think we have responded very well.
Springfield Public Schools hired a chief diversity officer, and so that's a person that is a champion within an organization. We have to have more people, championing that, but you need one cheerleader at least. And now you are faced with, in 2020, finding a new superintendent as well of the school district. What are some of the things that you are What do you need in leadership?
At all the levels, you need for people to have a shared vision for what we want for Springfield. We need some shared energy towards those things, and a shared commitment. It's not enough to have a person like our chief diversity officer, Ivania. Was not enough to have her in that position without giving her power, authority, and money, as well as supporters. So all of us have to be willing to and able to support her. I say the same thing even for my role on the school board. I've been telling folks in the community, it's not enough just to put me there and have me there. I need you all to come to the community, as the community to come forward too. We all have to work together toward a common goal and common issues. And so we need leaders who have big vision, but we also need some practical kinds of things to be dealt with at our individual schools to address some of the disparities that exist and some of the challenges that we face, both with a racial pandemic and a health pandemic. And Springfield is unique in that we are not a big city like St. Louis or Kansas City, but numbers-wise, in our schools, we are the biggest in Springfield. And we have a lot of poverty in Springfield too, which makes us look a lot more like some of the bigger districts. And so we really need someone who can see these multiple perspectives. We need someone who is not just good with finances, not just good with curriculum, not just good with management, but someone who can take all of the lenses to view our schools with regards to the social issues, the economic issues, the racial issues, and really bring that all together, and to take a big picture of what we need in our district and not just compartmentalize it.
When we come back, we'll talk about the nonprofit Shurita founded with her students and how it's building libraries across the community and teaching kids to love to learn. Support for Season 1 of this podcast is provided by presenting sponsor American National Insurance. We'll be right back.
Success comes a little easier when you have trusted day in, day out support. At Great Southern Bank, you'll have your own go-to team of financial experts to rely on and learn from, and who'll be there with you every step of the way. Because every leader deserves a great team behind her. Learn more at greatsouthernbank.com, ranked a Forbes 2020 World's Best Bank by our customers. Thank you. Member FDIC.
Springfield Business Journal has been the business authority for over 40 years. SBJ strives to provide the most relevant, timely, and accurate business news you need to make important decisions. Locally owned and operated, Springfield Business Journal helps businesses market themselves to other businesses. Since 75% of the readers are the owner, GM, or VP at the business, SBJ helps your business influence decision makers when it matters most. If you need to raise your profile when businesses are considering your category of service, make sure you are differentiating yourself by using the Springfield Business Journal.
Where did did you learn and grow to appreciate community activism?
I got it from my mama. I got it from my parents. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. My mother was a corrections officer, and my stepfather was a pastor of a church, and my parents ran a drug and alcohol rehab program also. I think my family just had a bend toward community focus. We even talk in my class about it's Hofstede's cultural dimension, and they talk about these different areas where communities or cultural groups can be on a spectrum, and one of them is individualism versus collectivism. And I come from a very collectivism community, a very collectivism family. This idea that we make decisions that impact all of us, not just one of us. And so when we do things, we have to think about the bigger picture, not just ourselves. And so we speak to, we fight for, we advocate for not just things that benefit us, but things that benefit our whole community. And so that's something that I grew up with. My parents never had drug and alcohol problems. Neither one of them have even. I don't think my mother's ever had a drink ever, but it was something that affected the community. So it's something that they wanted to contribute to helping to fix. And so that's kind of the mindset that I grew up with. It doesn't matter that it doesn't necessarily impact you. If it impacts your community, it impacts us. Mm-hmm.
So then you came from Portland, but you mentioned earlier that you've lived all around the United States.
I have.
That plays so much, of course, into what you do for a living, because then you see these dialects all across the country.
The dialects and the cultures.
The culture, yeah.
It's one of the things that fascinated me from the very beginning. Coming from Portland, Oregon, and I went to undergrad in Louisiana. Louisiana is like a whole different country. It was like I had never at that point left the United States, but going to Louisiana felt like I had left the United States. It was so different from anything that I had ever experienced. And coming to a college campus there where you bring students from all over Louisiana and all over the world there, it was just like, oh my gosh, like there's so much diversity, and it's beautiful, and I loved it. But it also just fascinated me, and so it became something that I wanted to observe and learn about with regards to culture and language and history and background and education and how those all played a role together. Going around the country, I also got the opportunity to see how education worked in different places and what worked and what didn't work. And it's just been something that I've just been drawn to from the very beginning.
How have you seen Springfield grow? Because you've been to these various places, you've seen maybe what progress looks like in other communities. So you've been here about a decade. Like, what's changed in Springfield in that time? There's
been a lot of diversity growth, which is one thing. And there's also been a lot of business and industry growth also. And I think there's been a move to try to increase diversity intentionally in Springfield, both within education and within industry, and I think that's important. There has to be change that happens internally in order for those things to be successful. You can bring people here, but without systems in place to support people who are from diverse backgrounds, you're not going to be able to retain those people. And so I've seen Springfield make some efforts toward that, and it's encouraging.
And, even you in your classroom, you kind of like day one, you identify as this is who I am and this is who you are, and let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, because I think that's so much of the hurdle is just like so afraid to say the wrong thing or to even bring it up or like, I don't see color. But we do. I mean,
And we need to.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one of it's dated at this point, but I still use it as a TED Talk. It's by an author. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I love her. She's a Nigerian author, and she has a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And I show that in the first week of class, and we use it as an icebreaker or opportunity to engage in conversation about our own cultural lens. And she challenges ideas of biases and stereotypes, both within society and within herself. And that's what I love about the video, is that she doesn't just talk about biases of the community. She talks about her own biases and where they came from. And so it kind of softens the blow. It's not like we start the class with, you have biases, I don't. It's like, we all have biases. What are we going to do with that? And I think that allows students to feel like, oh, okay, she's not saying that I'm wrong because I have biases. I start off by sharing some of my own biases, and they can be kind of surface at the beginning, but as the semester goes on, we can get deeper and deeper into where we really stand on things and where my mindset came about that. Why do I think that way? Where do those values come from? And now that I can verbalize them, I can challenge them. We can't change what we don't acknowledge.
So, as far as going to the children first and kind of working with them, you started a nonprofit in that vein to support kids with literacy. Mm-hmm. So tell me about how Ujima started.
So I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it's about 5 years now. I teach a course for graduate students in the fall. It's called School-Age Language and Literacy, where I'm training speech-language pathologists to work with school-age populations around language and literacy disorders, and just to help work in the schools, particularly with that population. And while I can teach them lots of stuff in the classroom, they didn't have a whole lot of practical experiences, particularly working with diverse populations. And so as I'm teaching about these things, the students just really need an opportunity to engage and practice those skills. And so we decided to do a literacy fair over at Bartley-Decatur Neighborhood Center, which is over in Midtown area. And it's right near Boyd Elementary School. And so we developed literacy activities, and I went door to door, knocking on doors, inviting families to come to our literacy event. We're going to have food and games and activities for the kids around literacy. And my students prepared for all these different ages and all these different groups of kids. And the reality is that we had a very low turnout. There wasn't a whole lot of people who showed up for the event. However, one of the things that I expressed to the students at that point was one of the things that I've learned from my experience as a postdoc in Michigan was that in order to get community engagement, you have to have community trust. And community trust is not built overnight. You have to be engaged over some period of time. So we committed at that point to engage with that community and stay present. That following summer, we started our literacy camp, where we provided breakfast and lunch and half day of literacy instruction for kindergarten through third, fourth grade students at that point. And we had a very successful summer. The students loved it. I think the community appreciated it. And we all just kind of fell in love with that neighborhood, and we fell in love with the idea of connecting through literacy. And so in order to maintain a relationship with the community, we started our family monthly literacy nights. And so once a month, on the second Wednesday of the month, we have dinner, where we have dinner conversation with kids and families, and then we break into literacy groups by age, and we do fun little literacy activities for about 20 minutes or so, and then every child takes home a brand new book that they get to choose. And the books that we curate for our collection is generally diverse authors, diverse characters, etc., because representation matters. We want children to find literature that they can engage with, and just quality children's books. And that now has been going on for about 5 years. And so we've grown to the point that now we serve infants, toddlers through fifth grade. Our infant toddler group is actually one of our fastest growing groups. Bringing parents in and helping them to learn how to engage with their children around literacy as infants and toddlers is a huge win for us. And we're very excited about that. And we've also expanded and moved a couple of times with regards to our literacy camp. We serve about 30 students over the summer. My graduate students from Missouri State provide the interventions in literacy, and they get supervision from a certified speech-language pathologist. It's now a full-day camp. We have partnered with the Springfield Arts Council, who provide a half day of arts activities. We also partner with Greene County Libraries, who brings to the library. And so it has grown from a half-day program for 2 weeks to a full-day program for 3 weeks, and we are excited about our growth and opportunities.
So, what are the outcomes that you track as far as literacy? Because, it's also one thing to know how to read, and it's another thing to master literacy too. How does that affect kids for the rest of their life?
I think one of my things is that I want kids to enjoy literacy. There's this paradigm that we talk about in the field. It's called the Matthew effect. It's taken from a biblical perspective, but the Matthew effect says that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer with regards to literacy instruction. So kids who enjoy reading gain from reading. They gain vocabulary, they gain knowledge, and they gain fluency, and they gain comprehension. And so they get richer with regards to literacy skills. The kids who don't have good literacy skills don't enjoy reading, so they don't gain vocabulary, they don't gain comprehension, they don't gain those experiences. So enjoyment and skills go hand in hand. And so we really want to help students to enjoy literacy. We don't want it to become a chore. We want it to be something that they enjoy. So we try to find books that they are enjoying. We try to provide opportunities for them to develop skills so that they can enjoy reading. And even when they don't enjoy reading, if we can help families to engage around literacy, I think it's great when parents read to their babies and their toddlers and their elementary kids. But parents, you can read to your middle school kids too, and you can read to your high school kids. You can read together, and those are opportunities for you guys to engage in literacy that is enjoyable for both of you, and just develops that kind of pleasure for reading.
What are some of the success stories that really stick out to you? Because you're not only seeing it with the kids, but you're seeing it with the parents too, because you're bringing the whole unit together.
Yeah. Well, this year, one of my big wins is that two of my little ones who started with Ujima when they were maybe a year old are now preschoolers at the new Ada Fulbright Early Child Development Center. And that, I think, is a testament to our partnership with Springfield Public Schools in the past, where we've worked with the Parents as Teacher program, and both of these families had parents as teacher educators come into their homes and work with their families on developing language and literacy and other kind of developmental skills, and that led right into them being prepared and ready to go into preschool program. Preschool is not mandatory, but it's beneficial, and because our families have been engaged with the district through us, and had the opportunity to find those paths and connections, it has built the opportunity for what we call social capital. They have these relationships with people that allow them to know about what's available for their kids in the district. And now we have two of our little ones who are now 4-year-olds in the preschool program. Additionally, we have lots and lots of families who come and get books for their infants and toddlers. And I have a family who no longer lives in Springfield, but when they first started with us, they had a kindergartner, or maybe they had a first grader and a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old. He was 2 at the time. And the first grader was already struggling a little bit with learning how to read. And the 1-year-old, he was 1.5, maybe 2-year-old, he had a very busy little personality, and developmentally had not engaged with books a whole lot. But in about 6 months of coming to Ujima, this little one learned how to sit with books, how to enjoy books, and where this little one, from the age of 2 up until going into kindergarten, loved literacy. The older sibling, who didn't start really getting engaged with literacy in a pleasurable way until 1st, 2nd grade, really still struggled to enjoy literacy. And so the parent talked about how she learned that providing those literacy experiences early on was so much beneficial to her kids, and she wanted to make sure that others knew the earlier you get them engaged with literacy, the better it is for them, because they love to read, because it's a pleasurable experience between the child and the parent.
You're creating libraries.
Yes, we are building libraries. We are building, and we love that idea. A lot of my little ones call Ujima their book club, and so they will say that it's book club night, and they're going to go to book club, and so I love that. I had a parent send me a video just this week. We had our drive-through, even with the pandemic, we're no longer meeting in person and having our regular event, but we are doing drive-through where parents can come and pick up a sack lunch and a book for their kids. And he showed me a video of his 2 daughters. One is she's one of the 4-year-olds who's in preschool, and then they have a 2-year-old, and she's talking to her 2-year-old sister, and she says, "Today we have book club. We're going to go see Miss Shurita." And I was just so happy to see that. It was just made me feel so special that these kids connect me with literacy. They connect me with their book club, and they enjoy that process, and I love that. A lot of our parents have talked about that. Even just being able to drive through and pick up the books and come to see all of our volunteer faces smiling and waving at the kids is a part of normalcy that they really appreciate. The kids look forward to their monthly book club.
Supporting kids kind of just is a thread throughout your whole life.
It has been.
Yeah. And because you've also been a foster parent.
I have.
Tell me about that experience, because I mean, what a thing to do. Oh my goodness,
what a hard thing to do.
Hard, yeah.
So my parents, again, they modeled this for me. My parents were foster parents. My mother is a foster parent, and I'm single, never been married, and I have no children. And it just came to a point where I felt like I had love and space and resources to give, and I needed to at least experience that. And so I signed up to be a foster parent, went through the 10 weeks of training to be a foster parent, and got my first placement several years ago. And I took in, particularly because I'm a single female taking in foster kids, there is a need often for placement for particularly teenage girls who need to be in a home where there aren't other people. And so my first placement was a preteen, and it was the biggest challenge that I've ever had in my entire life. And kudos and hats off to all the single parents out there. It is a hard job, but the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. And so I've now had a couple of different long-term placements, and I've also done some respite care and some of those kinds of things. But wow, it even shaped the way that I saw the schools. That was part of my experiences of learning school resources, gaps, holes, things that needed to happen, because I have a PhD and I had difficulty navigating some of the things that needed to happen for my student. The child had lived in my house, and I couldn't imagine for parents who weren't as connected with resources that I am, how they were figuring out how to navigate the system. So that kind of also shaped my desire to run for school board too, was being a foster parent. And I was a foster parent for also a child before with special needs, and that also shapes my experiences.
What did being a foster parent teach you about kids? Because you already know so much about kids, but this is a new experience. And then also, what did it teach you about yourself?
Oh, man. It taught me about kids. I learned a lot about trauma and how much it impacts kids' daily experiences. Even kids, I also learned that in trauma, children are extraordinarily resilient, and that they need a lot of support, and they need a lot of consistency, and they need a lot of patience, but they want to succeed, and sometimes their trauma just gets in the way of them just kind of doing the things that need to get done. And so I learned a lot about trauma, and we have, unfortunately, a lot of kids in our society that are facing trauma. And 2020, in and of itself, is bringing a lot of trauma to our kids. And so we have to be informed about trauma and how it impacts the kids, their development, how it affects their emotions, and how it affects their education. And so that's one of the biggest things that I gained from that with regards to learning about kids. What I learned about myself is that I'm not Superwoman and I can't do it all, and I need a lot of support. And I did have a lot of support and a lot of friends and folks who stepped in to help me along the way. And so having a network of people that social capital is so important. Knowing that you have people in the community who can support you and find ways to support you is so important. I encourage everyone to get your village. Find your people, and there are people in the community who want to support you, and there are lots of resources in Springfield, but it takes some doing to kind of figure out what that support is. Part of what we want to do through Ujima is to provide parents with a network. We are more than just an organization. We are a family, and we want to support our families in that. And so we try to make sure that we are aware of the needs of our families so that we can support them in all of their needs, not just with literacy. I learned that I need people. And I need my people, and I am not Superwoman. I cannot do it all alone, and I need the support, and we all need to find that kind of support in the community.
Shurita, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to No Ceiling from SBJ Podcasts wherever you find your podcasts, or watch videos from the interviews by visiting sbj.net/No Ceiling. This show is produced by Ad Smith Studio, with special thanks to Dustin Henderson and Joe Stearns. Photography and design by SBJ's Mackenzie Robinson. American National Insurance is the show's presenting sponsor, with support by Great Southern Bank. I'm Christine Temple, and this is No Ceiling.